Hey, it's time for the podcast. Welcome to Mornings with Matt, the podcast for small business owners and creative people who love to take on exciting projects but want less stress, more positive energy, and a lifestyle that they love. I'm Matt McLaughlin, and let's get going this morning. We're going to talk this morning about goal setting and how having a long-term perspective can really help in terms of alleviating stress in small businesses. This is something that I've kind of trained myself to do over the last several years, and it's really helped a lot in terms of keeping the big picture in mind and not worrying too much about day-to-day stresses. But before that, another habit that I have, let's start with our three things that I'm grateful for. My three things I'm grateful for today are: the exterminator came by to get rid of a couple bugs. I'm definitely grateful for that. Had some big Texas bugs coming into my house. I got my bookshelves, which is great, so I'm putting those together. And I was able to edit a cool design online that I needed for my business. Now, these things might seem mundane, but the reason that I do this is that these things that seem mundane to us, we take them for granted, when in reality, there's quite a lot to be grateful for in our day-to-day life, because all of us, especially those of us who live in first world countries, in the 21st century, are the beneficiaries of just immense amounts of knowledge and wealth, and it's easy to lose sight of that. Another reason I do it is that it trains me always to try and focus on the positive in a situation, and I can tell you, and my friends will tell you, that that's not something that comes naturally to me. My friends typically call me Grumpy Grandpa, because I tend to veer towards what can go wrong in a situation as not my norm to be grateful. So I have a lot of these gratitude games that I play. And speaking of gratitude games, that is the first of several lists that I'm going to talk about today. In this podcast, I'm going to talk about lists that I have on my computer. Lists as in lists, things that I've written down. I keep these on my computer, and I try to review them every day. I have 7 of them that I'm going to talk about, and these lists help me keep a broader context in my life and in my business. And so I'm going to tell you what those are, and hopefully you can use this for yourself, maybe use your own version of this. Now, these are different than to-do lists. These are not to-do lists for me. I have a to-do list. Let me take a look at my to-do list real fast. My to-do list has, oh my God, my to-do list has probably 200 things on it right now. The problem with to-do lists is there's always more to do. So I do keep a to-do list, but I use it as kind of a brain dump, because if something kind of pops into my head, if I'm doing some creative work or something and I don't want to be distracted, I'll write it down on my to-do list. And then I try to have a habit of every day or so going through and scanning that to-do list and seeing if what I thought was important at the time really was important enough to structure into my day, or whether I can kind of leave that thing alone. So these lists, these several lists that have to do with goal setting, are not to-do lists, because I really, on each list, try and keep about 3 or 4 things. So let me really briefly go through what's on these lists and kind of tell you how they function. So the first is my gratitude list. My gratitude list is what you just heard. I try to just find 3 things a day. They can be, and probably ought to be, really just mundane things that I might take for granted. And I try to find some gratitude for them, in the sense that I really try and put in context, or try to think about where they came from. For example, a really common one that I keep hearing is having coffee. I love coffee in the morning, and if you think about it, it's absolutely absurd that I can just get out of bed in my boxers, walk to my coffee machine, and put on the finest coffee from around the world, which cost me like $15. I can grind it up and make it. That's really an absurd thing. 100 years ago, that would have been probably absolutely impossible. And so, just thinking about that, thinking about what's possible to us, it can really orient you to the positive, especially if you make it a habit. Or I think it can. Okay, so that's my first list. I keep a list of those. And my second list and my third list are goals for today. I say today, but really it ends up being goals for today or the next couple days. I have one for personal goals and one for business goals. And I only have 3 things on each of those. I might get done 2 or 3 of those things, and then I'll go back to my to-do list and say, think about, okay, what's a really high leverage thing I can add to the list? And so I'm kind of constantly circulating those couple lists. And then on list number 4, I have my short-term goals, say 1 to 12 months. List number 5 is my medium-term goals, 1 to 3 years. This is still fairly specific, but a little more broad. So on this list, I'll have some metrics for my business that I want to hit. For example, in my music schools, I have metrics on that list of like, how many students do I want at the school, things like that. I also have some personal goals on there. I'm going to be 40 in a couple years, so I have a personal goal on there about what kind of shape I want to be when I hit 40. So that's list number 5. And then list number 6 and 7, we start to get into the very long term. So my list number 6 is in that 3 to 10 or more year range. So these are some really big, they're specific, but big goals. So I have some big goals about some property that I want to own. I have some big goals in terms of the type of romantic life that I'm looking for. They're specific, but big. And then list number 7 are what I call my life non-negotiables. And this might be the most important list of them all, because I can always refer back to list number 7 in terms of keeping myself on track and using it as a litmus test for, am I doing the right thing? So on list number 7, I have my life mission and several other things that I want to make sure are always incorporated into my life. So you might think that this is a little bit corny, but I'll tell you what my life mission is. My life mission is to continue creating new things through art, business, and knowledge, and to constantly expand what I know about the world, and to enjoy connection with other interesting people. Now, I can always update that mission, and it's very broad. You see, it doesn't pertain to one specific goal, and it's not something that I won't wake up one day and think, okay, I've gotten there, I've learned everything I want to learn, I've connected with all the people I want to connect with, and so on. But what that does is, if I'm stressed out or if I'm kind of bogged down in day-to-day activities, I can always come back to that life mission and think, okay, is this really helping further my mission? Or am I getting distracted by something that I'm not going to give a damn about in 10 years? So my go-to example recently has been arguing with my landlord. Is that something that I really want to get bogged down in, that negativity, thinking about that? Is that helping my life mission? Or can I kind of solve the problem I need to solve as best I can, put it aside, and then work on bigger things? I know it might be easier said than done, but it's worth having this thing that I can refer to. And then there's some other non-negotiables on this list. For example, to travel the world, to work towards complete financial independence, which I'm getting closer and closer to, but I'm not quite there. To have excellent health and energy, which is really important because I need that health and energy to be able to kind of keep moving forward. So you kind of get the idea. So why do I have these lists? Why do I review them? It's not just a mental exercise for me. I find that it's incredibly helpful in my day-to-day activities because it gets me out of being too narrowly focused on the fires that I'm putting out in the day. It keeps me focused on what's the broader context. Why am I doing this? And I find that most of us, we start small businesses. I mean, small business people are like the best people in the world usually, because they're basically saying, I'm going to do something that I love. I'm going to try and create something that's amazing. And I'm going to put, in a lot of cases, everything on the line for this. And a lot of us, when we get into that, we think it's just going to be something that's fun or cool. And we don't realize what's ahead. Now, if we're really lucky, it is just fun and cool and everything goes great. But from the business owners that I've talked to, that's not always the norm. There's a reason that a huge percentage of small businesses fail after a few years. And one of those reasons is one of them is, of course, money, but I think one of them is just psychological, that people just get drained because there's so many stressors. There's trying to pay the rent. There's trying to make payroll. There's working long hours. There's putting out emergencies. There's dealing with difficult people, things like that you don't really think about when you're getting into the business. And if you don't have this broader picture in mind, if you don't have these life non-negotiables, this life mission, you start to feel like you're not moving anywhere. Like every day is just another battle to make it through the day. I remember when I first started my first music school, I was teaching still a full load of students, which is in itself draining, and then I would stop. I would get done around 7 or 8 in the evening, and then I would have all these emails and phone calls to return to because I was trying to grow the music school. So then I would work for several hours on that, and then it would be like midnight or 1, and I would go home to my apartment, which was this nice apartment that I thought was something that a business owner should have, which I realized now is a stupid thing to think. And I would go home to that. I would collapse. I would wake up in the morning with this kind of feeling of dread of like, oh crap, what's gone wrong now that I need to fix? And it seemed like this cycle, and it was quite depressing. And my guess is, if you're a small business owner, you might be able to identify with that, especially if you're in the first year or two. So there needs to be a light at the end of the tunnel. Might be a little bit too much of kind of a malevolent way of thinking of it, but there needs to be a feeling of motion, a feeling of, even though right now I'm going through some stress, there's a reason I'm going through this. And what I've found is, if you can pair this kind of long-range thinking with having gratitude and with many other hacks that we won't get into, but I'll get into in later podcasts, if you can put this all together and start to train your mind to think this way, you will find that situations that used to stress you out don't stress you out now. And that's one of the things that has been a real learning experience for me in running businesses, is that I actually have to grow with the business. And part of that, the biggest part of that growth probably is spiritual and psychological, in the sense that I have to find some equanimity in myself so that not everything is something to freak out about. It's very rare that there's something that's really, really worth freaking out about. And even in those cases, there's almost always a solution. It's very rare that there's not a solution. If I can just step back, think about my long-term goals, and just keep moving forward. And I won't say that this happened overnight, but after a couple years, I found and I continue to find that I'm becoming more and more calm, more and more serene, and that I'm less stressed. Now, part of that has to do with these psychological, not psychological games, but psychological habits and personal growth. Part of it has to do with the systems that I've learned to put into place in my business, so that I'm not the one who's sitting there answering all the emails and stuff like that. But this is a big part of it. So I hope you find this helpful. I hope that maybe if you don't already have some lists like this, you'll kind of sit down. You can divide it up, of course, however you want. I'd love to hear from everyone how they're kind of setting their own goals. And don't be too hard on yourself with this. Remember that on each list, I only have 2 or 3 things. I'm thinking in terms of what has the most leverage, not how many things can I accomplish. How many things can I accomplish is not a business owner mindset. It's a hourly worker mindset. Business owner mindset is, how can I leverage the very limited time and mental effort I have in the best way possible. You can write down all those little minute details and things that pop into your head on your to-do list, but then you always have to make a decision and figure out where you have the most leverage. So don't overstress yourself if you do make these goals. You should not have hundreds of goals, 2 or 3 at each level, and you can always update it as you go. So that's it for today. If you like this kind of content, make sure you check out nobossninja.com. nobossninja.com is all about self-help for small business owners and creating businesses that we love and that support our life instead of taking it over. And of course, make sure you like and subscribe if you're on YouTube, or subscribe on iTunes. And this is Matt McLaughlin. I'm going to go ahead and sign out, and I'll see you next time.